and welcome to two of the Flourish podcast. We're back, which is a little bit exciting. Mostly, I'd like to do a little bit of a shout out to our eldest daughter, the lovely Hannah, who said to us a couple of weeks ago, when are you going to do another Flourish podcast? And then quickly said, if you're feeling really excited that you've got lots of followers, probably don't because it's probably just me. I've listened to it lots of time over and over again on runs. So anyway, that's great. Thanks for the encouragement, Hannah. But also thanks for the encouragement to do it again because it was one of those things that we really wanted to do, but just kept getting pushed to the bottom of the to-do list. So anyway, that's a waffle, but just to say hi. I'm Lisa, here with the lovely Ali. We always
Me?
like to frame it. We are married, just to explain. And the Flourish podcast is just an opportunity for us to kind of chew the cud. Is that a good saying? I don't know. Anyway,
You've used it. You've used it now.
chat about all things children's, youth, family ministry. It's been something that we've both been involved in together for lots of years, probably dominates most of our conversation. So we thought we'd share some of that with other people. If you haven't caught it already, this is season two. So in season one, we explored something called the Flourish model as we really dug into the why, the how, and the what of healthy children's, youth, and family ministry. So if you haven't caught that, then do check that out as well. But in this season, we're keeping with a theme, and we're going to be exploring all things professional development, which Al is very much in your ballpark. Tell us a little bit about what that means and looks like to you, professional development, and a little bit about paraclesis probably is a good time at this point.
Okay. I mean, for me, it really is about not just growing in a professional sense, but thinking about your own personal growth as a human, but also somebody in ministry. Um, and I think one of the challenges is, particularly if you are employed, you get a job, you just get going into it. It's a lot of hours, there's a lot of activities and groups to run. And it's not dissimilar from that if you're a volunteer. You kind of work full time, then you come out, you wolf down your dinner, and then you're out to a group and you're involved in stuff. But regardless of whether you're a volunteer or you are employed, the challenge is continuing to grow, continuing to learn, continuing to develop your practice. And so professional development for me encompasses all of that. But a kind of key foundational bit for me is looking after ourselves in ministry because it can be so pressured and intense and boundaries can feel a little bit wobbly sometimes, particularly if you don't have an office and you're doing everything on your kitchen table when you're preparing for a group or something like that, and everything just blurs into one. So I think a good place to start, which is where we're going to begin, I think, is looking after ourselves and thinking about what does our own well-being look like when we're doing ministry, and how does that shape our approach to professional development?
Great. So a massive, massive topic to be exploring in this season. We're going to look
Huge,
at huge.
huge.
We're going to look at things like reflective practice. What does that mean? I'm just now scrolling quickly to see what else we said we were going to do. We're going to look at how we build teams well, and lead those teams well. A little bit touching on line management, and some exploration of mentoring, external supervision. So lots and lots and lots. But as Al's already said, in this first session, we wanted to start with probably the biggest aspect of this, that, to be honest, in some ways could have been a season all of its own. So we're going to just begin to explore well-being in this session.
And I think it's a good place to start because I think it's foundational, but it's also a good place to start because of what you've been doing. You've been pressing into it for the last couple of years. So do you want to say a little bit about that journey and then what you then created, which we're going to explore a little bit today?
Yeah. Okay. So a little bit of our story really actually here. So we moved up from we were living near the south coast, near Brighton, 9 years ago this summer. Um, crazy. Moved up to Clitheroe in Lancashire, and at the time I was working as a Senko in a big secondary school with a big caseload. Um, Probably quite a toxic, potentially work environment in different ways. Anyway, we moved up, and my thought was I'll take a few months out of work and just settle our girls, who at the time were 12 and 9 going on 10. So I thought we'll get them settled into school after this huge move from one side of the country to the other. And then I'll just get a job because, it's not that difficult. It didn't feel like a Senko. Anyway, that isn't quite what happened. And I, for some reason, just could not get a job. Well, I'm saying for some reason, because actually, the more I prayed about it, what I really felt God saying to me was, there are things coming, but you are not in a place for those things right now. And we've got some work to do together. And I guess what was going to be 1 or 2 months became 6 months of kind of a bit of a sabbatical, really. It was an interesting and it was a scary time for us. We had a little pot of money that we thought was going to be a deposit for a house that then got spent to live on. But actually, that was God's provision. We can see that now, looking back 9 years later. And really, what came out of that time was just really God drawing to my attention the fact that I was not living well, the fact that rhythms in my life were not healthy. I'd always been a follower of Jesus. I first became a follower of Jesus when I was 6 years old. But actually, without realizing it, Jesus probably was no longer the first focal point in my life. Busyness, family, work, stress had all overtaken that. And actually, I probably wasn't really that well physically. And I can look back now at that and see how a lot of that was my body holding stress. Anyway, that's a little bit of the story. But what came out of that time of that 6 months was just really God drawing my attention to some beautiful practices that are much more about living well and fullness of life. So the first thing that grabbed my attention was I'd started reading a book because it was kind of a bit of a popular book at the time called The Little Book of Hugo. And so I read that and it just really grabbed my attention. But what I realized as I read it was actually so much of this stuff that had become kind of quite well spoken about just in popular culture, so much of it was just rooted in scripture. And Jesus' way of living and wisdom that comes out of the Bible. So, and a lot of the Hugo practices. So basically, Hugo is a Danish term that is kind of used to just describe like these moments of calm, stillness, like a slower pace of life in kind of a climate that's quite rainy and dreary. It's about embracing that, lighting lots of candles, having family games nights, going for welly walks, all of that stuff. I mean, what is not to love about that? But actually, a lot of it was practices of Sabbath. And so that was the kind of first thing that God drew my attention to. And then a kind of little journey came out of that as I began to just explore different practices that have become just really central for me now in living well. So, really pressing into Sabbath, really understanding stillness and kind of punctuating my day with these moments of stillness. Just the practice of wonder, being present in the moment, noticing what's around, and submission, just that, putting God in his right place. Submission's a funny word, isn't it? But actually, a lot of it is just about recognizing the awe and the wonder of God and the grace of God in my life. So yeah, out of that came this thing that I now call living well. These practices of Sabbath, stillness, wonder, and submission. And then together, Al and I, we've been exploring those as well, haven't we, Al?
Yeah. And looking at them in terms of how they work in different ways with different people, depending upon what they're doing. So when I've been doing training, I've referred to them. When I've been thinking about boundaries, when I've been doing mentoring, I've talked about them. And in fact, as part of Paraclesis, which we talked about, I think, in the last series, but I'll do a very quick Paraclesis, the Association of Children's Youth and Family Ministers. One of our key things that we have within that is the importance of well-being and looking after yourselves in ministry. So I've drawn on some of those principles within Living Well to talk about that regularly when we have monthly catch-ups with people who are Paraclesis members. And I think in terms of thinking about the holistic picture really of well-being and how with that kind of grounding, just those things that you mentioned around orientation, what are you orientated around? And then when you're thinking about how you're growing and developing professionally, perspective's a key thing to have. And if your perspective's out of whack, then I think we can make poor decisions, jump into things. Not fully present in the moment means we're missing stuff that God might be doing. So actually, being rooted, it's not a selfish thing to think about our own well-being and self-care. It's a core part of us being healthy in ministry and effective as we seek to work with others. So I've drawn so much from it since you started doing it, and can see how it actually overlaps with everything really, including the Flourish model that we talked in the last series.
Mm. And we'll come back to it in a minute, and we'll kind of look at each of those four rhythms. But I think from a kind of children's, youth, and family ministry space, I was so the Flourish course has just kicked off in the last couple of weeks, and I was sat with one of the kind of learning cohorts for that last week, doing a session, and we were reflecting on how. For lots of us in children's, youth, and family ministry, like we're often like activists. We get stuff done. And there's this real thing in just kind of wanting to do that. And that's a beautiful thing and a great thing. And it often means that work is vibrant, and, we just, there's a lot happening. But one of the dangers, kind of the flip of that, what can be a super strength, is also that sometimes we get ahead of ourselves, like or we run ahead of Jesus sometimes, and we can kind of have like an over exaggerated sense of responsibility for all of this stuff that I've got to do, but also like we just jump into it and we do things, and often when we do that, we do it in our own strength. And the massive antidote to that is to pause, to be still, to spend time with Jesus, to wait on him, to follow that example of Jesus, who often withdrew to quiet places. And when we look at when he was withdrawing to those quiet places, it was often before massive decisions, or before big miracles, or at the start of the day. It's that time to just, like, first and foremost, before I take a step, we wait on God, and we allow him to lead us. We see where his steps are, and that's where we put our feet. As I was reading a book by Eugene Peterson, I can't remember which book it's in by him, but basically he talks about the Hebrew day. And if you look at Genesis 1, where in the creation story, it says there was evening and there was morning the first day. There was evening and there was morning the second day. And I've read that a million times and not really thought anything of it, because it's just one of those passages that you read lots and lots and lots. But it really struck me in this book I was reading by him. He said, actually, in our way of thinking, the day doesn't start with evening. The day starts with morning. Like we get up and we do our day, and then we sleep at the end of it. But actually, that concept of the Hebrew day starting in the evening, that means that the first thing we do is go to sleep. But while we're asleep, God's day's beginning, and he is really busy. And so we wake up and all the kind of plans have been distributed and the orders assigned. And our job is to join in with what's happening, not to be like, this is what my day looks like, Lord. I invite you into it to join with my day. It's like, it's totally the other way around, that God's day begins and we get invited to join in with that. And so a really great way of reminding ourselves that that's the truth is to pause really regularly, and to fix our eyes on Jesus, and to allow him to lead us.
And I guess that one of the challenges with that is there's lots of expectations on us to be the people doing things that are kind of somehow we're going to add to what God can do by us
Mm.
being involved. So that evening thing, and the first thing we get to do is sleep, is that kind of the first thing we get to do on the Sabbath when God created everything is relax and enjoy Him, and that relationship. But so many things when we're in ministry come at us, the expectations of parents, the kids, church leadership, how we're so often get into comparing ourselves in terms of ministry with other people doing ministry. So being grounded in these practices is so essential for our health, just not just our kind of mental well-being, but I think, as you alluded to with your own journey, physical health as well. If our body holds stress and some of those challenges that we find in ministry. So this really, for me, is the most important thing before we get into some of the stuff in later episodes around professional development. This
Mm.
we're talking about today.
And I think, you've picked, I've mentioned it, you've picked up on it, the whole kind of health thing. Um, yeah, I think that's really important because just to give a little bit of my story. So when our eldest daughter Hannah was born, it was not a straightforward birth. It was a little bit complicated. In fact, it was a lot complicated. And I think without realizing at the time, I was probably suffering from quite significant post-traumatic stress. Um, and I didn't really realize that. And so what began to happen now, so I've always held stress in my body. As a child, if I got really excited about something or really nervous about something, I vomited, which was really annoying because it meant I missed out on quite a lot of cool stuff as a child because I'd get really excited about it and then I'd make myself sick. And so that's always kind of been how my body's held stress. But I think post Hannah's birth, that really kicked in. And so I'd have moments where I would be completely fine one moment, and then within 5 minutes, literally be lying on the floor, needing to be sick, couldn't really speak, and that would last for 24, 48 hours. And I would say that happened every few weeks for quite a few years. And we like spoke to doctors, we, had loads of tests done, and no one could ever find anything. And I was convinced like this is a real physical problem. It's also massively limiting my life. And I guess over time, I kind of learned to manage it. I learned there were some triggers. I learned that kind of hormonal changes was a trigger. I learned that stress was a trigger. I learned that doing too much was a trigger. So I kind of reduced and reduced what I did to this manageable thing that meant I could manage it. But actually, it was life limiting. If anyone had suggested when it was at its worst, that it was kind of like, I guess that it was an emotional and a kind of stress response. I think I was not in a place to hear that at the time. I wouldn't have held it well. Because for me, this was like a real physical thing. And I had an understanding at that time. My understanding has massively changed since. But at the time, I think my understanding would have been, you're just saying it's all in my head. And this is not in my head. Like, this is a physical thing. And it took me a really long time to recognize stress and what that is and how we hold it. And often we do hold it in our bodies. I am proper pragmatic. I can cope with quite a lot in my head, as in I don't feel stressed in my head. I'm quite pragmatic. I can deal with some tricky things and I can navigate it and hold space. But because in my head I didn't feel stressed, and that for me was what stress was, I wasn't recognizing that actually the kind of physical responses I had were a stress response. So I think understanding stress in some ways is a really important place to start. And there's been a lot of learning that's come out over the last 20, 30 years as we've understood our central nervous systems more. Sorry, I'm waffling and I wasn't going to go here, but it felt like an important story to share because I think lots of us are holding stress and not recognizing it. And then we add in this layer that all of the well-being stuff just feels a bit fluffy or a little bit self-indulgent. Like, I definitely felt that when we moved up here and this stuff got stirred up for me. I was like, we have got kids that need to eat. And I'm basically going, I just need to spend time with Jesus right now. And it felt massively self-indulgent. And that probably was the first first battle to work through, of Jesus just saying, you need this, we need to care for you, we need to look after you, and me just allowing and accepting that grace, that goodness, that life, that healing, because I was fine and I needed to be fine, and there were things to do, and I didn't have time to be self-indulgent like that.
Mm. But I think the key thing really is how everything's connected. It's like nothing is, and I think sometimes again in ministry we separate things out. We've kind of got spiritual work, we've got kind of our physical life, and that's what you're kind of the way in which you do stuff. That's outside of that space sometimes, our emotional or mental load and what we carry around with us, and we can put stuff in compartments, but we're whole people. And kind of the shalom of God is the kind of peace and its wholeness. And I think part of what runs through the way in which you put that together in the living well is its wholeness that we want. And that's what God wants for us. That's what, living well looks like. It's what his abundance looks like in terms of John 10:10. And I do think sometimes in ministry we fall into the trap of feeling guilty for prioritizing our own time when actually for us to be healthy in ministry with others, we have to. Um, and you did that to bring, um, in some ways, the best you could to the family through taking that time to actually be restored in lots of ways after
Mm.
what had been, you know, not great.
And it is, I mean, I've said already, all the well-being stuff, like, all good things are God things, is a little bit of a saying of mine. But all the kind of well-being stuff that is kind of, we're beginning to talk about more, it's all rooted in scripture. It's all there. And that kind of understanding of holistic health is there. In fact, it's there right in the first commandment. When that Jesus has that conversation and is saying, they're saying, what is it? What do we need to do to effectively have eternal life? And it's love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Like, it's there. It isn't just like in your head, know that God is God. Um, uh, uh, Love him, but it's love him with all your heart. So with all your kind of emotional well-being, love God. With all your strength in your physical body, love God. With all your heart, soul, mind, in your mental health and the way that you think, love God. And of what have I done? Heart, soul, which one? Anyway, all four of
Spirit,
them. Heart,
soul,
soul,
yeah.
your spirit, your body, your emotional being, your mental health, in every aspect, love God, because God is interested in all of it. God created all of it, and all of it is how we engage with, worship, journey with God and worship him. So it's really, really important. And it most definitely, when we're talking about well-being, we're not talking about a kind of indulgent thing or something you do if you've got any time left, because we're doing the real work here. And there are, like, I think in ministry, it's like there's kingdom work to be done. Like, we can't just sit back. It's like, whoa, actually, God's perfectly capable of doing kingdom work without us. We get invited to join in, and what a beauty and grace that is. But actually, it's God's work, and we need to hold it in the space that it is. And the first thing we're called, the Westminster Catechism says that the reason for us being is to love God and to enjoy Him forever. That's our calling. And part of that, loving God and enjoying Him and worshipping Him, is that we get to join in with His story. But first and foremost, we're called to love God and enjoy Him with our whole being, and all of that's important. So we're not talking, when we talk well-being, we're definitely not talking about this kind of indulgence thing. But also for the children that we work with, well-being is important. Our well-being is important for the children. It's important that we model something, because we want our kids to be healthy and to understand that well-being. But also, if we're going to do our jobs well and if we're going to interact well with kids, then we need to be healthy. So I always talk in training, the kind of cliche thing really now, about being on an aeroplane, and in those safety announcements that are done that are quite comical, where the air steward stands and I don't know what I'm doing. Points to the exits here, 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 and here. But
That's
what,
all they do. They just randomly wave their hands around. That's you did that
yeah.
yeah.
So one
Oh,
of the
what
things
they
that
do.
they say in that is in the event of an emergency when we might need oxygen, which is also quite horrific, to be honest, but they're preparing us for the worst, I guess. That the oxygen masks will drop out. And please, if you're traveling with children, put your own oxygen mask on first before you help the children around you. And actually, that is so counter intuitive. I think for lots of us, in our own families, like we often put our kids first. In ministry, it's all about journeying and serving the children, and that's really, really important. But we can only do that well if we are looking after ourselves first. And for some of our children who really are not okay and who really are struggling, they need to borrow our calm at times in order to feel safe. And they can only borrow our calm if we are bringing calm. And we found that. So that kind of looking after ourselves and making sure that we are that we're healthy, that we are at peace as far as possible. And the reality is we're not always going to be like that. We're going to have days where the kids have spilt breakfast as we're rushing out of the door late, or those mornings happen. They happen for all of us. But it's kind of recognizing when you're in that place so that you can then maybe phone a friend when it's kicking off in your children's ministry, because that's also caring for yourself, recognizing you're not going to bring the calm in that moment because you are not feeling calm yourself. So that kind of just understanding ourselves and caring for ourselves is so, so important.
Yeah, brilliant. So, can we do a whistle stop tour of the different things that are part of the kind of living well picture that kind of illustrate, yeah, I guess how those things came to be in terms of your thinking around what you wanted to focus on, in terms of living well, and then we'll try and reflect on those in a ministry context a little bit.
Perfect. Okay, so I've already said the first one that drew my attention was Sabbath. It's interesting because I think, well, so certainly I can't speak for everyone, but certainly my understanding, I grew up in kind of charismatic evangelical churches. And I guess I'd picked up mixed messages around the Sabbath. I guess the first message is like, the importance of the Sabbath, don't forget the Sabbath, which basically, from what I could gather, meant it wasn't really okay to shop on a Sunday. Don't do that. But then at the other extreme, there was also a message that was often thrown around around how Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, therefore the Sabbath doesn't matter. And kind of just this like between the two, they cancelled each other out, and it meant that the Sabbath wasn't really this thing anymore. But actually, Al, you've already talked about it. We were born, like we were created on day 6 in the creation story, which I think is a helpful narrative to help us understand our relationship with God. And day 7, the first thing that happens is rest and Sabbath. There's another passage that talks about, in fact, one of my favorite passages in Isaiah. God is saying, you'll be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. And I guess in the work that I'm doing, that's a core value for me. Like everything within me goes, yes, I want to be part of that, restoring communities, building broken walls. Like, yes, yes, yes. But then the verse that comes straight after it is if. And it's a big if, and it basically says, if you keep the Sabbath, it's like we are only going to be useful and effective in joining in with this rebuilding and restoration story if we are holding Sabbath, as in if we are keeping Jesus first and we are working from rest and we're recognizing that the world doesn't stop because we stop, but actually it's an act of going, God, we recognize that and we rest and we spend time with you and we delight in you. So yeah, that was Sabbath.
So I think the challenge in ministry is if you're working on the Sabbath, when is your Sabbath?
Hmm.
I think for lots of people, because they're again what they've been brought up with is the Sabbath is a particular day. If you're a Jew, it's the Saturday. If you're a Christian, it's Sunday. And in terms of thinking, if we're in ministry, we're working. And I think that's a challenge around, well, when is my Sabbath? Or actually, we think, well, I don't get one because I'm working. Um, and then, other people are working during the week. Therefore, I feel guilty if I take time when other people are doing stuff. I remember once when I was a full-time youth pastor at church, I went for some lunch and I went walking through the centre of Ealing at the time. And somebody was like, what are you doing here? I thought you'd be working. I'm like, it's my lunch break. I'm allowed lunch. But it was just that idea of like, I'm expected to be working all of the time. So people seeing you out of context from being in church, it's like, whoa, you're not working. Whoa, calm down. I'm just out for lunch or grabbing a sandwich or something. So even that can feel like, when is the time that we get that is time that we can rest in God's presence and we're not doing something for him? And I think that's it's the challenge. It's a bit like you can't just join in with worship in a way where you're not being observed or watched when you're at church. And then immediately you've got stuff to do straight after. So you're not fully engaged in worship. So even as, people in ministry, when do we worship in a way that is just, I can give myself here to this time and this space and be with God? I can't, because in 5 minutes I've got a group to run or whatever it is that's going on in our heads. So when do you take Sabbath? I think is an important question to ask. And what does that look like for you in terms of building that into your regular rhythm and pattern? And it's fine to do it. Don't neglect it.
Yeah, and I think so kind of my journey began with like living well and exploring these four rhythms. And then out of that, I created this course called Rhythms of Grace, which is kind of just a small group resource helping people really explore, journey with those, try things out, learn from each other. But it's called Rhythms of Grace because of a beautiful passage in the Message translation of a passage in Matthew that talks about, are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion, and taking a real rest? But it says, I won't lay anything heavy on you. And to explore these unforced rhythms of grace. And I think it's really, for me, that was a really core part of living well. We're not learning kind of these I mean, sometimes they're called spiritual disciplines, but the thing with a discipline is it can be seen and viewed as something that is really rigid and a way to do it. But actually, the whole kind of being Lord of the Sabbath, Jesus being Lord of the Sabbath, is like, what's the essence? What's the wisdom that is in this? And then how does that outwork? Because what it isn't is about a rule and a regulation and just a tick box to follow. And yes, you've done it, or no, you haven't. But actually, what's the essence? What's the wisdom? And actually, there's grace within all of that. So some weeks our Sabbath works really well, and some weeks it doesn't, and that's okay. But it's working out what it looks like for us. So and the other thing with it is it changes as life changes. So we had a little time where it felt like it was going really well for us as a family with Sabbath. The girls were both at home. We got into this beautiful little rhythm of kind of doing our Sabbath from kind of Saturday tea to Sunday tea. And we'd start with like a nice family feast together, and then we'd have a games night, and then Sunday we'd worship together in the morning, and then we'd just have a bit of a mantra of ours was do something you love, like read a book, go for a walk, whatever it is. But just to kind of switch off for 24 hours. And then, Hannah moved to uni, and like life just changes, rhythm of life changes. And so we had to really wrestle with our Sabbath, and we've kind of settled at the minute on like one evening meal of like family switch off, and then a kind of half day of going for a walk, the two of us, of just praying and walking and reflecting and dreaming together. But it is the principle of having that time where you stop, and there is time for that because you make space for that, and everything else fits around. And if it doesn't fit around, then we're doing too much. But yeah, so Sabbath was the first one.
Yeah.
And then stillness was the second one, which is kind of like mini Sabbath, as in like it's you can't just do one thing and then expect that everything's going to be all right for a week. So, like, have one day of rest and then go full pelt the rest of the week. But it's that kind of rhythm that Jesus models so well of continually coming back to the Father, and having those moments of stillness and punctuating the day with those. Be they, one of the first things we did as we were exploring Sabbath was we bought a stovetop kettle, which at times I regret because it's a bit frustrating, but it's a good practice, as in it takes time. So if we're making a quick cup of tea, we're not just whacking the kettle on and carrying on with a bit of work. It's just that pause of just within this day, I'm just going to pause for 5 minutes. I'm going to breathe slowly, deeply, and just, I quite like to do a breathing prayer, which is just a really simple Bible verse, kind of said in my head as I breathe in and out slowly. But those little moments of things that you can do, like a practice of when are you reading the Bible? When are you praying? How are you praying? I've realized I find it really hard to pray just sat still, eyes closed, hands together. But actually, I've started doing a prayer walk each morning and just walking around, and God really draws my attention to different things. And that's really fueled my prayer life. So that kind of rhythm of just daily moments with God are so helpful.
And I think it's really important to recognize stillness means different things for different people. We're all made differently. And when we were doing when you were doing the Rhythms of Grace course at St. James's, and I had a little group of young people, um, one of the young people immediately was like, "Well, I don't do stillness because they are constantly on the go in their head, all the kind of different things that they do." But what we began to press into was it doesn't need to look like you're just sitting there still. You can also be doing something that stills or quietens your mind, and you're just in a different headspace. That can also be stillness. And so we pressed into that. What does that look like? For me as well, I was thinking, what does that look like for me? So when I'm making a puzzle or making a puzzle, doing a puzzle, I don't know whether it's just I'm so middle-aged, I'm doing puzzles, but I love a puzzle.
I don't, I think old is what I
What do you mean
think.
old? So
Like
I
a
love a
real
puzzle.
old man moment of just sitting and doing
Absolutely
a
love a
puzzle.
puzzle, but I can disappear into a puzzle and not come out the other side until I finished it if I was allowed. But we've got life and other things are happening, so I can't just do it forever. But when I'm in that space doing a puzzle, it's like nothing else is happening but the puzzle. Or when I'm drawing, nothing else is happening but the drawing. And that's a really good thing to find for your own kind of stillness. Now, in those moments, I can also pray and I can also spend time with God, but just the brain not be constantly going is a good practice to get into. So you're pausing, you're giving your brain a rest from the normal stuff it does. And that's a healthy thing for us. So it's finding what are those rhythms that of stillness and that kind of space in our heads that works for us.
And I think one of the things that I am loving about like kind of the fact that we live now in this little pocket of time, in the time when scientifically we've been able to really explore and understand much more about the brains, our central nervous systems, our bodies, and what I am loving noticing is just actually all we're discovering is a little bit of a greater understanding of truths that are in scripture. So we have been called to pray, to meditate, to pray continually, to give thanks to God. The Sabbath was really important. All of this kind of stuff that actually we're kind of repackaging, rebranding, and bringing in different ways of mindfulness now and things like that. But it's all wisdom straight from Scripture. But the science is really helping us understand it. So we know that the brain needs those moments of stillness. Like mindfulness is basically concentrating in one space. For me, that space is to concentrate on Jesus and on God. But it's a really important thing. And actually, I went on my prayer walk this morning and walked through the park, and it was a really beautiful morning, and all of the wildflowers are starting to burst and bloom, and there's colour everywhere. And every single person, there were lots of people in the park this morning, either because they were a bit early for a meeting and they were just killing a bit of space, or they were walking through the park to get to where everyone was on a phone. every single person. You walk past the bus stop, and every single person at the bus stop is on a phone because we don't know how to be bored anymore. We don't know how to just allow our minds to wander anymore. And that kind of stillness of just slowing, of not just filling with the kind of like grey noise constant input, but just of settling and stilling is so important. We can scientifically understand that now, but the wisdom was there in the manual from the creator. When he made us, he told us how we work best. And another part of that is like wonder is the next rhythm,
I
but
was just going to
actually
say that leads us nicely into wonder.
it does go into wonder because, you know, the whole kind of giving thanks. There's a huge push over the last few years on gratitude journals, 3 things that you're thankful for each day. The story of the Bible is to give thanks in all circumstances. It's all God wisdom, it's all good stuff. Of just noticing and fixing your attention on that, that is so important and so life breathing and giving.
Mm. And on wonder, as we press into that as the next thing, I love wonder just as a thing. And I can't help it as a children's worker. I think it's like if you don't have wonder, just check yourself. I think as a children's worker, it's got to be part of your DNA a little bit. Um, but just it's that ability to kind of notice things in the moment and celebrate and enjoy them for what they are right then. And I love that. And it's what I see in children. So I was doing a preach a week or so ago. And within the preach, it wasn't the main thing, but I couldn't help but mention it, is because Jesus was talking about the kingdom and the disciples were arguing about who's the greatest in the kingdom. And he says, unless you change and become like little children, you won't enter it. And it's that idea of changing and becoming. And for me, that's connected with wonder and our ability as adults, as grown humans, to continue to wonder at what God has created. So I can remember doing walks with the kids when they were little, and we'd come out of the house. We were supposed to be heading somewhere. We'd get halfway down the, would not even get halfway down the road. In fact, sometimes not even the end of the drive. And either of them, Hannah particularly, when she was little, would be like, a leaf! Like there's loads of leaves on the ground. She'd pick up a leaf, go, look at this leaf. And then we'd walk a little bit further. This was when she's about 2.5. And then we'd see another leaf. She'd be like, another leaf! And it was the same as the one she just picked up, but ever so slightly different colour. And, that could go on for ages if I didn't say we still actually have to get to where we're going. But I love that kind of delight and wonder. And for me, that's integral for us as practitioners. So if I've lost the wonder, I need to ask myself if I'm doing well. I think that's a key. If I've lost that, then I need to ask myself, how am I doing? There's something not right, because I think it really connects something with like the heart of God. There's a beautiful G.K. Chesterton quote, which I can't remember, that's all about repetition and about how God makes every daisy almost unique. We'll have to find it and kind of lob it out there maybe with the notes from this episode. But it's such a beautiful quote around um, just what if God makes each daisy individually because he doesn't get tired of making them. There's something wondrous about that that really excites me about why I do children's ministry and youth ministry. And after 40 years, can't see myself ever stopping doing them. But so much of it's tied up with wonder that I see in kids as part of what I think God has put in them. Is a model to us of what it should be like to be close to Him, and I see that so often in children. So that's why I love. One of the reasons I love children's youth ministry is the wonder.
And those the rhythms all hold together and complement each other as well and feed into each other because actually a lot of our wonder comes out of stillness, of making space to be present, which feeds into. But equally, an absence of stillness can often be the enemy of wonder because if we're just thinking, what are we doing next? Keep going, keep going, keep going, and we're program orientated and we're stuck in that space, then we don't notice what is going on around us because we're too caught up in what we've got to do. And so that those moments of stillness kind of create the opportunity often for wonder of being present, which is why, like, get off your phone when you're walking,
Yeah.
notice what's around, and just allow yourself to be a little bit bored first, maybe, and then out of that. Like we always, when the kids were little, They used to hate one of the little phrases that we had, or that I had particularly, I'll own it because they really hated it, was if they'd say that they were bored, we'd be like, bored children are boring children. Because
I can
because
hear it
actually
now.
if you're bored it's like where's your imagination, where's your like curiosity, where's the wonder, like notice what's around you. And so it's okay to be a bit bored, but then like allow that to feed your imagination.
So in a ministry context, just thinking about what that looks like, it's really important if you're leading stuff particularly. So I'm saying this to you, if you're a lead volunteer and you lead stuff, or if you're an employed children's and youth and family minister, when do you observe what's happening and notice? And that's hard. So that does need you to have an enough team that means you can not have a day off, but you kind of can turn up and be present rather than lead loads of activities in a session. And what are you noticing when you do that? Um, Sometimes I think you can treat it a bit like, oh, great, it's all happening. I'll just duck back to the office and sort some things out, do some admin or whatever. A bit like if you're a teacher and you don't stay in for the assembly because you've got something else to do and somebody else is doing it, so I don't need to be present. But being present and noticing when you're not leading is a really important part of your practice, because what are you missing because you're so fully doing the activities? What are you noticing? Which kids are engaging? Which kids are engaging just in different ways? Which kids need extra support? What are you noticing the kids doing that means they are bringing something beautiful, and our kids leaders noticing those things? So just being in that space, wonder at what is happening
Mm.
around you. And it's hard to do that if you are leading and the next activity depends on you every time. So again, think how you're using your team, but also think, is there time and space for you to step back and just watch and be present?
And also, like, what are you valuing in that? Because ultimately, what we're talking about is presence over program.
Mm.
But if all you're thinking about is your program, and that's what's important, delivering this program, you're going to miss the presence. You'll miss the wonder. There won't be opportunity for curiosity. Yeah.
And sometimes in the presence, just quickly on that, sometimes in the present, you're in the middle of a story and you notice that suddenly they all lean forward, everybody's with you, and then but you've got the next thing to do. But it's like, what if you stayed there? What would happen to the next 5, 10 minutes if you stayed there and just thought, this is a moment, let's not miss this moment. So maybe there's something else to do off the back of the story you hadn't planned, but they're all like suddenly they're there. And you notice those things. If you're being present, you're not just delivering something that's like a script that you've learnt in advance, but something that is holding you and it holds the kids, and you think this is it. So don't run past that because, oh, we've got a game to play in 5 minutes. Sit with it. Or maybe a question comes up in a small group you're leading, and the rest of the kids go, what? Sit with that. What does that look like? And sometimes it can feel like the program is lost. But isn't it better to press into what God is doing in the moment sometimes and not just think, well, I haven't achieved my program?
And sometimes, I mean, you said, sit with it for another 5 minutes. Sometimes it isn't even about that. Sometimes it's not about 5 minutes. Sometimes it's about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of part of what I personally really explored with stillness is how do I just punctuate my day with these tiny moments. It isn't about, and sometimes it is, and it feels like a great joy, and a really lovely thing to be able to enjoy, like an hour and a half in the morning with a prayer walk and sitting with my bike, and that's a beautiful thing. But practically, there isn't space every day necessarily for that hour and a half, 2 hours. But sometimes it's about 5 minutes, sometimes it's about 30 seconds, and just sprinkling those throughout the day, those tiny moments, are really important.
What we've not mentioned, which is about the tiny moments, is breathing prayers.
I mentioned it briefly, but yeah,
But did you? I missed it.
that's okay.
This,
We
this,
talked a lot. We need
the
to speak.
stillness bit. So when you were talking about stillness, I just think that's a great way of punctuating your day is a breathing prayer. I mean, just breathing deeply is a way of telling our bodies we're feeling calm, we're feeling safe. But when we add that with prayer and scripture, how much more powerful is it? So I just think, some of those that you've shared that are great for people to do. That only takes a few seconds, really, but can be a powerful way of feeling kind of centered and ready for what's next. by just taking that time.
And also, I mean, we did say at the beginning of this session, it could be a mega session. Like there is so much to it, but everything overlaps, doesn't it? Because the other aspect of stillness that I've really enjoyed exploring is like the set, how you bring your senses into that. We talked about heart, soul, mind, strength, like body, spirit, emotional, mental, physical. Like how do we weave all of that together? How do we worship God with all of those? So one of the things that I really liked to do, particularly when I was working in a kind of like in a team as opposed to kind of working for myself. And I knew that occasionally there might be a tricky meeting ahead. I quite enjoyed like just burning an incense stick and doing a really quick prayer of like just the may the fragrance of Jesus fill this space, may the fragrance of Jesus fill this meeting, and just having that in the background as I was on a Zoom, just that physical, like sensory reminder of the fragrance of Jesus to bring kindness, to bring Jesus in every conversation. So there's so many kind of physical, sensory ways that we can worship and enjoy those moments of stillness. Lighting a candle in the morning as you say a prayer, just as a stick. Like there's so many ways that we can do that. It's a joy and exciting to explore. And then the last rhythm, it always feels funny because when we do the rhythms of grace thing, it is the last rhythm that we get to. Uh, but in some ways, it's also the first, as in it underpins everything, and that's that rhythm of submission, which we kind of explored a little earlier about. It's literally just making sure that we are orienting our lives in the right way, that Jesus is the center, that we're continually like yeah, facing him and seeking him first. Yeah, we've talked about that one a little bit, haven't we?
Brilliant, we have. And I think it links for me with ultimately who we're working for. So again, in a ministry context,
Mm.
am I working for this church leader, this PCC, diaconate, eldership? Um, yes, in one sense you are if you're employed, and there's expectations around that. But ultimately, if we're called, we're serving God first. So in terms of who we submit to, it's Him first. And sometimes that can feel challenging and disorientating if we feel like leadership doesn't always reflect some of those values or things that we feel like are really important. But knowing that in our own kind of sense of our own walk can give us stability, but also strength when we're having conversations with leadership around direction and values and vision. Knowing who we submit to first, I think, is really key. And ultimately, I think knowing that God honors us when we step out and we say stuff that needs to be said because we're submitting to Him first. Um, and I've encouraged people in kind of mentoring sessions around what it looks like to, in that space, recognize that ultimately it's God that we're working for. Um, and to, if there are things we're uncomfortable with or not sure about, it's okay to bring those, and we can bring those respectfully, thoughtfully, sensitively, but it's remembering ultimately we're serving God. And it's a bit like if you've got a passion for intergenerational ministry, for example, and you think, I really believe God delights in it when we all come together. Um, but everything conspires against that happening. I think it's really important to gently bring challenge and say, I'm not sure that we're reflecting all that we could as God's people together. That's just one example of where maybe, in terms of our approach to kind of submission kicks in. It's challenging to think about it in a ministry context sometimes. Um, but it's also really important for us to notice, and I just want to say this, if you feel like you're not in a healthy space in terms of what church leadership looks like, really encourage you to pray into that. Um, and if that feels like that's you, do get in touch with us because we'd love to journey that, help you think that through, reflect on that. In terms of submission being something that is a place where you feel safe and completely held and supported, and there's a healthy submission that can come with really healthy, good church leadership. And sometimes leadership spaces don't feel like that.
Yeah, but ultimately, like we're talking about this submission in its right place is
Yeah,
submission to
totally.
only safe space that that can happen is with God, and submitting to Him. It's a funny word, submission, and it's one that, as I was kind of putting together Living Well and kind of naming these four rhythms, I really wrestled with, like submission, surrender. Neither of them are words that we're necessarily comfortable with in our culture. And both of them have real negative connotations and have been used in an unhelpful and unhealthy way at times. But ultimately, and even within the church, like there is this thing of like we're submitting to God because effectively the narrative we can sometimes bring is because we're worms, like we're worthless, we're rubbish, we're nothing without God, which is so not what I believe is the truth. Because actually, when I read the story of God and we read the Bible, what I see over and over again, screaming from every page, is a narrative of God's love for us and of how He values us and treasures us, and we're His greatest joy. And we need to kind of claim submission in its right place, that we submit to God and recognize who He is, but in that space we encounter grace, mercy, love, and value, and we're treasured and we're lifted up. Our heads are lifted as God kind of meets with us in that space.
And I guess, yeah, Jesus is the ultimate example of submission in that sense. Did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. Um, Made himself nothing, made himself a servant. But again, we can manipulate those verses into kind of something that's not healthy. But ultimately, if we model what Jesus does in terms of his relationship with the Father, I think it's an incredibly freeing place to be, rather than a place that feels like, oh, I've got all these. It's not restrictive, it's the opposite.
Mm.
It's just if we enter into it fully, we realize how much space we have to be the people that God's called us to be.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I feel like we landed in a really kind of
Well,
serious and big place, and we didn't do that justice. But basically, we're talking about where are we orienting our lives, with kind of Jesus at the center. Yeah, perhaps we'll pick that up again in a future episode. But that's it. I'm aware that this has been a really long session, and we knew it would be because it's such a big thing to cover. But also just a little kind of glimpse and a starting to scratch the surface really of this beautiful world of fullness of life with Jesus, effectively, is what we're talking about. We normally end our podcast with a take home, but rather than that, this week, what I th what I thought is we would just give you a bit of a signpost, if this has kind of struck a chord and you want to explore it a little bit more. So rather than a kind of take home thought, we're going to give a take home action. And there are loads and loads of resources on the Wonderful Me website, that are all free to access on Living Well. There is some blog posts that talk you through each of the rhythms. The Rhythms of Grace course is free. Each session has a video. There are loads and loads of resources in the Living Well resources section, including, which is a good place to start, a whole self check-in. So if you are just at the point, having listened to this session, of going, okay, so how am I doing? That's a really good question to ask ourselves regularly. How am I doing? And there's a little whole self check-in tool on the website that will help you explore all of the aspects of that: heart, soul, mind, and strength. How are you doing in each of those areas? Yes.
and
Anything
that's
else?
on wonderfulme.org.uk if you don't know
Yes.
where the website is.
Brilliant. Cool. Thanks for listening.
Thank
This is
you.
session one. Next session, we're going to be digging into something that links beautifully with wonder that we got a bit excited about in this session, and curiosity, as we explore the importance of reflective practice. So we'll see you, hear you next week for that. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.